When I was a tiny boy thing, I happened to be playing Megaman Battle Network 4, which I liked. In the section of the game there's a part with a theme park, and inside of it there's a horror mansion based on the adventures of vampire hunter Solar Boy Django. Inside the place you can find a nice chip and Hideo Kojima, which is nice. What's also nice is that later on you can also actually meet this Solar Boy Django and assist him in a vampire cremation. Later on I found out that this was an interesting attempt at a crossover between Capcom and Konami, with the idea of cross-promoting Megaman and the series I'll be talking about today, Boktai. So, Boktai is a GBA game that came out in 2003. It narrates the story of Django, a vampire hunter that uses the power of the sun to fight vampires. As for gameplay and scenario, you can easily boil it down to an isometric mixture of The Legend of Zelda, Castlevania and Metal Gear, with a touch of spaghetti western, which is western films made in Italy. One of the main gimmicks of the game was that the cartridge itself has a solar sensor, which would sense if the sun was hitting it and how much, and then translating it into the game. This apparently was a thing that Kojima really wanted in his game, who in an interview said, "I've been saying for a lot of time that I want to make something weird. I have an idea. For example, for a CD game where if the player dies, the disc itself actually breaks. I want to make something that weird." So, since Konami was making medical equipment with various sensors at the time of the development of Metal Gear Solid 2, he was in the right place at the right time to issue the implementation of sensors and cartridges for his many needs. While not entirely clear on how much Kojima actually directed the game, though, as this actually seems more of an Ikuya Nakamura joint, it's safe to say that he left his mark on it as a producer. The game presentation is really good. I always like the art style, simple but sleek. Interestingly, the colors would also adapt themselves to the sun level. So if the sun were to hit the screen, as you would do since the game wants you to do it, the rays wouldn't affect the tones. Furthermore, the presence of the sun made sure that you didn't need a backlight, which not all Game Boy Advances had. The music melds Metal Gear-y rhythms to Western instruments. I always loved how they rendered the sound. There's also many voice lines, which is actually nicer quality that you would expect from a GBA game.
The undead appear, breaking the natural cycle of life and death.
And in general, I really like the beeps and boops the game has. The story of Boktai begins with a monologue presenting the undead infested city of Istrakhan and how the world is kind of ending. We are introduced to our main character, Django, and his father's old mentor, Master Otenko, who happens to be a sunflower. Your first objective is to take vengeance on the wounded vampire nemesis of your late father. The first level is the mansion where the vampire lives. And the intro is really cool. The mansion is a very nice level as it acts as a tutorial and also as a slice of that vertical cake, as it encapsulates most of the elements that make this game interesting while also introducing the mechanics. Starting off, as you enter the area, Master Otenko will summon the Pile Driver, a vampire killing machine, which will be useful later. After passing through a desolate road with crows with these spiders that lay down webs that trap you, it's here that basics of combat introduced. Our main weapon in the game is the solar gun, Gun del Sol, a weapon that harnesses the power of the sun to shoot energy. That varies based on the many frames you can get in the game, which vary much in use and effects. In the open you can recharge it everywhere, but when inside you need to find places where the sun filters through windows or cracks. Sometimes Otenko will drop in to teach you some things and encourage you. He's not intrusive and is actually very nice when he talks. Deeper in the castle we meet for the first time one of the main enemies of the game, which are the Bok, undead that are equivalent to the Metal Gear guard. If they spot you they can call others, while also filling the room with ghost things called the Chloroforlum and kind of kill you. However, there are many ways to deal with them. You can knock on walls and distract them, sneak past them, stun them, kill them, cool stuff, you know. Even more interesting is the level design of a level. That changes if the sun has already set. For example, the introduction of the ghouls happens in the first bit, with the crows instead of inside the mansion, as they are susceptible to the sunlight. So in the beginning area you will be sneaking, as you don't still have the damaging frame yet. So it's possible to do a sort of challenge run in the game, as certain enemies will have different locations and patterns. Anyway, we finally reach the room where the Count of Ground-Soaken Blood should be resting in his coffin. In here, we get ambushed by bats, and after defeating them, we get to the most interesting elements of the level design. As in Boktai, when you defeat a boss, it retreats into a coffin, and you will have to drag it back through the level, like in Django the film, and burn it with a pile driver. The thing is that also the level and puzzles in Boktai, unlike most games, are not only constructed with a forward motion in mind, in the sense that you progress through the level, complete it and leave, but are recontextualized to when returning to the beginning. So that the dungeon is only half finished when you reach the boss, which becomes an element in the new puzzles, which also adds difficulty, as the coffin you're dragging not only is heavy, but there's also the fact that the vampire inside of it can try to hurt you, run away, call for help and even more. Even the part with the crows at the beginning becomes more of a challenge, as the crows will start to attack you while you're encumbered. You then reach the final stretch of the level, where you activate the pile driver and begin the final stage of the fight, the purification battle. Where you burn the remnants of the vampire, which will try to fight back and resist the concentrated beams of sunlight. These sections are more of a challenge in the management of resources and need of constant stream of sunlight. The first one is kind of easy, but they can get super complex later on, as the bosses can even attack you in different ways. You then get a ranking depending on the time. Continues, the number of time you got seen, energy used, pretty good I'd say. Except that the Count actually saw this happening and what you burned alive was one of his doubles. You also find out that he's captured the Moon Beauty, and now your quest for revenge against the vampires is not yet over. So I won't go into too much detail of what happens because I want to make sure that people play this game, because this game has a lot of charm and I like it. So like in a lot of Kojima team games, this game has a lot of neat details in it that make the whole experience well thought out. Even the bank system, which I skipped in the first part, which lets you deposit and borrow solar energy in the levels for later use, has stuff like interest rates and loans that if you're not able to pay for, you get punished with manual labor. When talking about aesthetic though, this game has a super distinct personality. The aesthetic and lore of the game has many origins, having elements for Norse mythology, Gothic architecture, and spaghetti western vibes, that somehow melds perfectly in the aforementioned art style. The game also has very nice references to films, which is a classic for the team, like having Django dragging coffins, like in the 1966 film, and more developed in the second game, the city of San Miguel, which has a coffin maker, like in A Fistful of Dollars, and also in the film that inspired A Fistful of Dollars, which is Yojimbo. And the funny thing is that it goes full circle when in the game you can find a gun frame called the Samurai. As I said before, Boktai has many elements of inspirations from some other types of games, but one that takes a lot from is Metal Gear. Not only for the fact that there is a character that dresses in the famous Foxhound jacket, and other infantry stuff happens within it.
Neither enemy nor friend.
But in fact, the thing is also fits in many of Hideo Kojima's writing recurrence, with legendary absent father figures, the end of the world, and the message of going outside of your home. There's also a nameless character in the second game, which is widely accepted to be the actual Solid Snake from the Metallic Gear, which is not the only time where these two games have shared universes.
Sunlight!
A video I stumbled upon in my research also kind of made me notice how much of Death Stranding was taken from these games, as they seem to share some thematic and visual elements. Lastly, of the argument of Boktai references, the signature red sheen of the sword belonging to Jetstream Sam in Metal Gear Rising, the Murasama, can be also seen in the Muramasa sword you can make in Boktai 2 and the Murasame in Boktai 3. The nice thing about Boktai is how much it actually managed to explain you the important things while not being intrusive. Like, when characters present a new concept or a name, it's always highlighted and in square parentheses, which we later see used normally in dialogue when it becomes an accepted term. The tutorial, except for some fundamentals, is relegated to wall panels you can activate and are full of personality and subtle hints that make you want to explore the possibilities of the system. And also on personality, Otenko, when also appearing, makes different sounds.
Otenko! Otenko!
So it never sounds too repetitive, which doesn't seem a lot, but it makes a difference. And his voice is also very calm and soothing.
May the sun be with you.
So it's different from the Ocarina Fairies of yore. In general, many things in the game have a lot of flavour that in other Metal Gears will be relegated to codec conversation, while here you can even see it in the explanation of why enemies respawn in dungeons. Or even a journal in one of the libraries of accounts, which has elements of the detached, gruesome brutality he partakes in. The title screen also has an entire menu section with small video tutorials explaining some mechanics of the game, and also not usual for the time, it has a very adaptable difficulty option which has many different choices, and the normal mode is not called normal but it's called recommended, so it's telling you that you can play the game in the way more suitable to you. It's the small stuff that really gets me in games, and it's probably because of this game, which has a lot of small neat stuff, like losing. You can die in this game, and when you do, you get your game over. Well, there you can listen to the game over theme, which is really nice actually. And the return to life is actually contextualized by actually paying money to the Dark Clones, which I talked about before, with money, and return back in time before the death, which is a function that later in games you can actually use when you are stuck in puzzles. So a lot of the accessibility stuff I talked about in the game comes also because of the main focus of the game, of the sun, is that the main source of your power is not under your direct control. It is not to be taken for granted, and it's necessary for your quest. With the game, Kojima wanted to make people more aware of the sun's presence, since in his view the sun was becoming less present in people's minds, even for people who play games, who once went outside in the summer to play the arcades, as they now have their own games at home, so he wanted to give that sort of idea of going out in the sun for your activity. Which, as a side note, it's kind of similar to what Hirohiko Araki said to people in the Luca convention of 2019. In an interview, which I'll be posting in the description, Kojima went into more detail in his choices. It's a handheld game, so you can play it in your living room, or go hide in your own room and play. I think the reason the GBA has had such an explosive popularity with kids is just that. They can escape surveillance from their parents. That's how handheld gaming has grown to be such a big thing. But looking at the software that has been released up till now, it's almost all stationary. It's portable, but basically you just plop down somewhere and play. The games haven't really leaned into the portable aspect very much, and it's more like having a portable TV than anything else. So I thought to myself, I want to make a game that can only be played portably. I realized then that if a player could go outside and by moving around change his environment, the weather, the temperature, the terrain, and if those changes could be reflected in the game, It will be an experience unlike anything seen before. The key to all of it is the live element. Video games are a form of media in which the developer tries to create an experience that will bring joy to the player. That's very common, but in doing so there's an element of compulsion, of the player merely retracing the path the developer has laid out in advance for him. On the other hand, if you look at the success of online games today, a big reason for that is the sense that the experience is live. Yes, the creators have laid down the framework, but the experience is unpredictable and changes depending on who you play with. I wanted to bring that live fun to portable games and create something where the environment and even the very gameplay changes as you walk around. Boktai is the answer to that larger inquiry. So at the time I'm writing this review, the game isn't too rare. Thing is that to get the full experience you would need to get the physical version. Emulating Boktai is kind of tricky, but it's not too difficult. For the ROM to work you need a patch, which thanks to small but extremely active Boktai fanbase is available for all versions, which makes the Solar Center manually controllable and lets you play the game. I'll link everything. So if you haven't noticed, I really kind of like these kind of games, and I hope that with this video I made you interested in them so that you could too play them. So yeah, have a nice day and bye.